especial no Brasil, que comemora o Dia dos Povos Indígenas. E para nós é um momento de reflexão e de busca de alternativas realistas para alcançar a plenitude dos direitos civis para toda a população nacional, especialmente para os povos indígenas, quilombolas, afrodescendentes e dos saberes tradicionais. A nossa contribuição, considerando todos presentes aqui, é a produção desse encontro. Meu nome é Mariane Salum, eu organizo esse evento juntamente com Daniela Balanzatec.
I have organized this event with Daniela Balanzatec, a partnership between the Interdisciplinary Research Laboratory of Evolution, Culture, and the Environment at the Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology of the University of São Paulo, and the Latin American Historical Archaeology Lab of the Department of Anthropology at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. This is the first of 6 meetings that will take place between 2023 and 2024. In 2024, we intend to have in-person meetings in Brazil and in the United States. This first meeting will address issues related to indigenous archaeology, territory consolidation, and human rights. This academic activity is a result of our deep solidarity and collaboration with all indigenous people and people of African descent in the Americas, and the pressing need for academic research that is more diverse and leads to concrete results and benefits for these communities. The topics were selected given the struggles that indigenous and African American peoples continually face in the Americas, so we can discuss a common agenda to protect their civil rights and recognize their land rights. We hope that these meetings will help communities grow stronger to reclaim their rights and protect their ancestral heritage and territories, but also build collaborative networks with representatives of various national organizations and universities. In all our upcoming events, we will invite Indigenous and African American speakers to discuss the following topics: Indigenous and African American women's movements and grassroots organizations, cultural heritage and sustainability from the perspective of communities of practice, heritage policies for the African diaspora, rekindling memories through collaborative research, repatriation and revitalization in Latin America. In addition to the seminar, we intend to create a collective website with multi-themed content produced by several communities, exploring the possibility of collaboration between archaeology and other academic research groups. These communities have connections in their countries and sometimes across countries, but the idea of these forums is to create a platform that combines knowledge, practice, problems, and demands in the Americas, in Africa, for so many people who have been constantly displaced so we can hear their different histories of endurance. But before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the land of the Massachusetts people where UMass Boston is located, and their neighboring communities of Nipmuc, Wampanoag. We also honor the lands of the Tupi, Tupiniquim, and Kaigang peoples where the University of São Paulo currently stands, and the ancestral territories of our speakers and moderators, the Tuxá peoples of Bahia, Eastern Pequot of Connecticut, Tupi-Guarani of São Paulo, and Potawatomi of Michigan. And now I hand it over to my colleague, Daniela Balanzatec. Thank you, Mariane. And we would like to honor the ancestors of the indigenous colleagues who are here with us for this first session, as well as their communities or nations. Natasha Gambrel, Yakuna Tuxá, and Luan Apuka will talk about their distinct perspectives as members of the Pequot, Tuxá, and Tupi-Guarani peoples. Each speaker is going to share thoughts and experiences that are either personal and collective as indigenous people and academic. They are talented young people who move with wisdom and eloquence between the knowledges of their traditional communities, the university, and education, showing how important it is for academia to find new paths and deeper intellectual alliances that respond to the interests of indigenous and African American communities. Our moderators today are two professors from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, from the Department of Anthropology, who start from the archaeological anthropological academia experience in the United States. Our mediator, Dr. Blair Morso, is a citizen of, actually, Pokagon Band of Potawatomi Indians, and has set an example of successfully combining traditional knowledge, art with futuristic references and pop culture. Dr. Stephen Silliman, who will provide the closing remarks, is an archaeologist with over 20 years of collaboration with the Eastern Pequot community. We are here with the purpose of continuing to expand a network of dialogue and articulation of voices and agendas of communities and peoples in the Americas, including indigenous leaders and African American movements, to talk about heritage, recovery of historical memory, ancestral practices, protecting indigenous languages, recognizing land claims, and others. This process is only understood in the context of the relationship between traditional knowledge and other knowledge. At the same time, we try to ensure that this exchange of experience drives new versions to build an academic agenda that is in constant communication with different centers of knowledge. Finally, we would like to mention two women who inspire the activities of this event. Sylvia Kusikanki, that the decolonization of university starts when those who create knowledge, produce knowledge, and their stakeholders discuss on equal terms from different centers of thought. There's no decolonization theory without decolonization practices. And Chacriaba, the university has a challenging task. It's not enough to only recognize the existence of traditional knowledges. We have to also recognize those who bear that knowledge and share that knowledge. And here, as organizers, we have shared 3 questions with our panelists. And our moderator will be asking our speakers, and each of the speakers will have 5 minutes to answer their questions. First, we will have some introductions. So we will introduce our speakers. Then we will move on to the questions. We will also have questions from the audience, and then the final remarks by the moderator and Dr. Sullivan. With that, I hand it over to Blair.
Thank you so much, Daniela. My name is Blair Morsell, and I'm happy to be the moderator today. I will begin by introducing our 3 panelists. First is Natasha Graham-Bell, who is the great-great-great-granddaughter of John Randall and Abby Faggins. She is the daughter of Valerie Gambrell, current tribal counselor. She has been dancing Eastern blanket, jingle, and Northern traditional styles of dances since the age of 8. Natasha has represented at several powwows and continues to do so to this day. At 16, she was crowned Miss Eastern Pequot. Natasha has actively participated with the Archaeology Field School Collaborative with UMass Boston since 2008, and most recently in 2002. She's traveled to several local schools and colleges speaking on behalf of her tribe. In 2015, she graduated from Eastern Connecticut State University with a BA in English. Natasha is currently a 10th grade ELA teacher in Bridgeport, Connecticut. In 2017, she was elected to Tribal Council as counselor, where she currently serves with both her mother and brother. It is one of her greatest accomplishments. Natasha's passion is representing her tribe, telling their story, and helping the next generation. Lua Apuika is a being of the forest, a being curious about life and about the teachings of the elders and his people. He is an indigenous teacher of the Tipu Guarani language and a member of the Tabuco Recoipi community in Peruíbe, Sao Paulo. Luan is an artist, writer, activist, storyteller who converses with the spirits of sound to transform reality through the art of rhetoric. Luan is also the director of audio-visual effects in the Colectiva Sobro, a mentor during Tupi Guarani gatherings, a member of the Indigenous Teachers Articulation Forum in the state of Sao Paulo, and part of the Indigenous Education Center of the National Executive Commission for the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. Takuna Tusha is an activist and indigenous artist of the Tusha people from Rodelas in the state of Bahia, Brazil. She is a researcher and a student in Spanish language and literature at the Federal University of Bahia. She is a researcher and a student in, Yakuna is an illustrator, painter, and writer who distinguishes herself for her work portraying the plurality and the resistance of Indigenous women. The intersection between race, gender, sexuality, and politics are recurring themes in Yakuna's art. Her work has been displayed in prominent art institutions in Brazil, such as the Pinacoteca in Sao Paulo, the Museum of Art in Rio de Janeiro, and the National Museum of the Republic. Thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to all of the panelists. I'd like to begin this panel by asking a question of each of you. The first is, what and how has your community or tribe or Indigenous group been defending and protecting as part of your heritage, including territorial recognition, environmental resources, human and civil rights, and cultural transmission?
Creo que podríamos empezar, es una sugerencia, podríamos empezar
maybe
en
we
el orden
could
de-
start in the order that you introduced them.
Sí, en el, I was thinking about that we can start in the order that they were introduced, yes.
So that would be me first, I think. That was a big question, but for me, at least my tribe, we're actually currently fighting for to regain our federal recognition in the United States. We have to do that to prove that we're Indigenous, even though we shouldn't have to do that. We know who we are. We've been here since the beginning of time. So for us, we're just trying to prove that to this day. We had our federal recognition and they took it away. So we're currently in a legal fight to prove who we are. I like to say what they did to us was genocide, because that's exactly what they did. They tried to destroy us with a single mark of a pen. So my tribe is currently in the fight for our existence. One way we kind of combat that is our archaeology program with Dr. Stephen, UMass Boston. We use our artifacts to kind of prove that we've been here since the beginning of time, and that we'll continue to fight until we get what is rightfully ours. And I think that's kind of my answer to that question.
Yakuna, would you like to go next? Maybe Luan? Yeah, I can go next. No problem. So, hello to everyone. I'm really happy to be here and talk to you and share this meeting with you. This is a very important day for us here. This is a day to celebrate our struggle, our fight, our endurance. And the Tusha people has used different strategies to defend and protect our territory, our cultural heritage, and everything that is important to us, some of the basic rights that we are entitled to. The Tusha people was really impacted in the late 80s by a dam that was built in our territory. that means that my people is still trying to get our land rights recognized by the government. This dam is a synonym to progress to those who are non-Indigenous, but it really hurt the way that we live traditionally. It impacted the river. Our river is now dead and claiming for help. And the Tusha people is still trying to get our land claim recognized. If our land claims are not respected, we have to find other ways to resist. And political organization is a very important tool here. And political organization means many different things. We need education, legislators, and we need to go to school so young children can learn about us from a very early age so that we can resist. And I believe that women play a very important role in this. In my case, art is also a way for me to talk about my territory, to protect my territory. And I feel the same way about being in the university so that I can talk to my people and I can join political organizations. So these are some of the ways that we have currently protected our territory in a broader sense. Hello, can everyone hear me okay? Yes, we can. So I salute you. I'm Luan Apuka. I'm part of the Tupi-Guarani people. I live in Tabasu, Recupupã community in a country where people currently call Brazil. And I thank all the organizers for getting us together here because we believe that communication is really powerful. It's great that we can get together to destroy and rebuild sacred connections that can really strengthen all of us. This is a very special day for us, the Indigenous people of Brazil. And this is a day that celebrates our fight for our land and for the spiritual lands as well. Because when we talk about territory invasion, we are not only talking about the land in the sense of the dirt below our feet, but also we have our bodies and our souls invaded as well. And that's why we have to protect our territories through our language, through our stories, through our bodies. So there are many different ways for us to protect our heritage. So we could spend days here discussing this first question alone, but for the Tupi-Guarani people, just like for other peoples, we have been fighting for centuries for the recognition of our land rights and our traditional ways of being so that we can do what we call in our language yandereko, our way of life that we have practiced for thousands of years. And what we're doing is we are creating some materials both in our language and in Portuguese, the Brazilian language. We are also trying to teach about our traditional culture and our rituals for younger Indigenous peoples. So these are very powerful strategies so that we can persist. We also use a lot of audiovisual elements to really strengthen our communications and share our sacred way of living. And we also connect to other tribes, other people, so that we can grow stronger together. So I think that with that, we can lead to more policies that address our specific needs and help us to really change our territories. I think meditation is also important because, as I said, it's really important for us to think about our knowledge. This is the decade of Indigenous languages, and every year, many languages were dying off because there were no speakers left. And I think that's why it's so important for us to talk to other indigenous communities so that we can resist. I see that here today we have speakers from different communities. So I think that it's great to listen to other peoples and our relatives so that we can all grow stronger together. Thank you so very much for inviting me to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those excellent responses to our first question. In some ways, you all three have started to answer this second one, but I wonder if we can perhaps take a deeper dive into the main challenges that you or your community have faced in the recognition of your land ownership or land stewardship, language, and cultural heritage. And if you would like to go in the same order, that would be good.
So at least for us, I know with like my story, at least with the Pequots, is like we started with the Pequot War, and that was in the 1600s. But in doing so with the Pequot War, they destroyed a good portion of our nation, and then they made it illegal for us to speak our language. They made it illegal for us to return to our ancestral lands. And then on top of that, they outlawed, like I said, the language. They made it illegal to return, and they also sold us into slavery. So we kind of got broken up with that. And that was kind of the first genocidal act that we faced. And then as time went on, our people continued to go back to our reservation. So our reservation was deeded to us by the King of England. So it predates a lot of the stuff that happened in the United States. And that's territory that we occupy to this present day and today. And some of the things that I think we're doing to kind of keep this fight alive and keep this hope alive is, like I said, just the archaeology has been a big part of that. And even with the federal recognition, when they took it away, we continue to fight. We continue to practice our culture. So I feel like that's a big part of it. Meeting, coming together, and just doing our best to stay here and be visible, especially in the United States. My tribe has faced erasure, I would like to say, because a lot of times they don't allow us to speak. They don't allow us to tell our story, and we've gone forgotten. So we've made it our mission to kind of let people know that we remain, we exist, and we're still here, even if it doesn't always seem like that. So I think that kind of answers the question. Thank you.
Well, yes, here in Brazil, we're facing a very similar problem. We're also being silenced and erased. In the case of the Tuxá people, we have had contact with settlers for centuries. We have also suffered aggression and abuse for centuries. My people has also been forced to abandon their language. Our territory was invaded, and we suffered a lot of discrimination so that we could cease existing and abandon our culture. But more recently, with the dam that I mentioned that was built, we saw this aggravated. I say that colonization is always a cycle that starts over and over again. Here in Brazil, when we talk about indigenous peoples, and today being such a special day for us, it's so hard for us to understand that we continue to be so invisible in the eyes of most in our country. And I think that one of the main challenges that we have faced to really defend our territory and our culture is the same we have had for so long: racism. In Brazil, racism is almost never addresses indigenous people. So with my art, and of course other indigenous artists, we have tried to show how racism affects us here in Brazil and how this is something that really prevents us from really enjoying our civil rights. It's very common for us to see people become really ignorant about what the indigenous peoples go through in Brazil. And capitalism is also another layer of abuse, because they say as if we are enemies of progress, but progress for them is something that is not sustainable. There's no future the way things are done now. So my people has devised different ways to resist. So we have a community inside our territory where we organize politically, and we also have promoted our language. We have created a school curriculum that really addresses our own needs, and that helps us to perpetuate our traditional knowledge, and so that we can remain together. When I go to university, I see many people saying that scientific knowledge is better than traditional knowledge. And there are the traditional knowledges that we see in the world. But when I go back to my community, I'm reminded that everything that we know and everything that we have lived is crucial for us to really understand the world in a way that embraces diversity. And just to wrap up, I would say that our main challenges is still racism, because racism is what prevents us from enjoying civil rights and for having our land claims recognized. Well, yeah, this is a very powerful question, because I think we are talking about memory here, yes? And our memory goes back centuries, and these are memories of abuse, aggression, the spiritual aggression. But something that I feel is really interesting is the fact that indigenous peoples, we have a particular view about our land. Because let's say for a long time, we did not have to claim our right to the land, because we knew that each person or each people who lived in an area had the right to be there. And we were there to protect the environment, to protect the forests. Because for us, the forest is not only a resource, it's not only that something we can use to our own benefit, it's actually part of who we are. We are connected. So it's what we call the pluriverse. So I feel it's sometimes difficult to stay in a single patch of land, given that we can connect to the universe more broadly, but having a patch of land under our feet that is recognized, legally recognized, is something that has grown to become more important. So in my people, the Tupi-Guarani people, well, we have always been nomad, and we never really thought about land in terms of ownership, but as something that was actually enjoyed by all beings, humans, animals, spirits. And now, actually, well, this is still how we see it. Right now, we are at the last patch of forest of our particular biome. So, well, there are so many who want to take this land away from us, because this is a very rich land. And we know that there are mining companies that want to take the land away from us, as they have done with different areas around us. And another thing that is under threat is our religion, let's say. And religion comes from a sense of connection. And our people was actually persecuted by the Jesuits, by the Catholic Church, that did not recognize our spirituality and tried to impose theirs on us. So our knowledge was lost. Our languages were lost. Tupi-Guarani was one of the most spoken languages in our territory, and now we have so few speakers. And another thing that was very strong the colonizers, the settlers, also used our language to colonize other indigenous peoples. So, and this was also a way to kill our language, because they started to write using our language, but none of us had been invited to do so. So they used our language to spread their message. In our territory, we had 1,500 languages or more. There are some research that says that today we have only 270 languages still being spoken. And many people think these are many, but if you think that we used to have between 1,500 and 2,000 languages, there were so many others. And these are all indigenous languages. But Tupi-Guarani was then used to communicate with many of these communities back then, so that, and to actually convince these people to speak our language first and then speak Portuguese, erasing many and hundreds of languages in this process. And language is something that is crucial for our territory, because territory is not only land, even though land is powerful, but territory also includes our bodies, our languages, and all of that is in connection. This is how we see the world. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much to each of you. If we could, for this last question, switch up the order to give some folks a little bit more time to think about the next question, that would be great. Perhaps if Yakuna would like to go first, if that's okay, and then maybe Lua, and finally Natasha. So this final question is a lens towards futurity. We've talked quite a bit about the history of your individual communities, the issues that are currently being faced by you and others. And so I wonder now if we can look toward what you envision as the strategies that you have employed to revive, to protect, and defend your heritage that you think will foster a better future for your community, your nation, and your humanity.
Okay. Well, the way I see it, well, I'm an Indigenous woman. I'm part of the LGBTQI plus community, and I come from northeastern Brazil, which also suffers prejudice in my country. And it all reflects in my art and how it is perceived. When I was a teenager, I started to get involved with the political activity with my people. And from a very early age, I felt how important it is for us to work collectively and to fight for the rights of your community, go to the capital of your country, and to really understand how the Brazilian government addresses indigenous issues. Here in Brazil, for the past 4 years, we had a government that overtly wanted to genocide us, to practice genocide and to decimate indigenous peoples, LGBTQ communities, and many other minorities. Starting 2019, I have designed artistic languages to really convey what being an indigenous woman in Brazil, a lesbian Brazilian woman in Brazil is. And given the way I see the world, that is something that, of course, comes from my people, is also something I reflect on my art. I am an illustrator. I am also on social media to try to really connect to other indigenous peoples and the Brazilian people more broadly. I feel that my art has a sense of urgency, given everything that has been erased from our history and all the abuses that have been perpetrated against the indigenous people and women more specifically. So what I do envisions a future that is beautiful, let's say, where more people can understand how important it is for us to embrace diversity, to embrace plural perspectives, not only indigenous knowledges, but also African Americans and other worldviews from the African diaspora. So I think we have to embrace diversity. And the tool that I use to get there is art. I will use to be a writer as well. So I used to write a few texts that I used to create connections with other indigenous communities and Brazilian communities. And then that's when I realized how powerful art is in creating new memories and new dialogues, because the history of art is usually whitewashed, especially here in Brazil. We only had indigenous peoples painted by non-indigenous artists. So we were spoken of, but we were never heard. And I feel that now it's about time that we can have our own voices heard, so that people can listen to our narratives, can listen to our stories, and can understand our pains and can learn from our knowledge, because we have a lot to teach, so that people can understand that we all live in a single planet. We all share the same natural environment. And what I do here reflects on people all across the globe. So the tool that I use to fight and to defend the cultural heritage and material heritage of my people is to use art to really change the way our story is told, so that we are no longer erased. That's perfect. I see we have questions on the chat as well. Should we answer those now? No, we're going to have some time for that later. No problem. Okay, sure. Perfect. Well, yes, there's no point. There's no way to talk about the future if we don't talk about the past, because memory is also something that helps us build a future. What we do now is what we used to build the future. So what we advise now is what we use to build the future. So future is today, future is yesterday. So that's why actually promoting ancestral knowledge is a way for us to build a better future, because the truth is we have been abused, we have been invaded. And what we have to do now is fight against that, so that we can actually recover our traditional way of life, so that we can connect with others now in a healthier way, so that we can all connect to the land in a way that all beings feel interconnected as well, and not broken down in silos, not isolated. So more and more we try to really promote our heritage and protect our heritage, our cuisine, our language, our way of life, so that we can grow stronger. Because most of what we struggle with now is the result of our culture having been destroyed. And that's something that, and we have so many threats now, capitalism, other religions that are trying to be imposed on others. And what we want to do is we want to really appreciate our own culture. If we really believe that what we have is valuable and cannot be erased, that's the first step, because our ancestors, they we're the guardians of our culture, and we have inherited that role. And by doing that, well, actually, how can we do that? Through dance, music, prayer, healing, through traditional methods. So if we can strengthen our territory, and remember, territory is the way we live and how we connect to others, I believe that we are growing stronger right now. And we're going to able to not only heal ourselves, but heal others, because we know that Brazil is in and of itself indigenous land, all of it. So when we travel to other indigenous lands, we have to see, and actually we do see our words being used elsewhere. We use our food being eaten elsewhere. So I think that we should start by recognizing that Brazil is indigenous land. So what do Brazilian people eat? Oh, cassava, fish. Many of those things were things that we have been eating here for many, many years. And I think that we have then to acknowledge that this is our territory and decolonize our thoughts, because I think that the knowledge that we share in our country should be actually more diverse and include more languages, include more dances and music, because it's important for us to, for example, let's say you're going to communicate with someone, like a healer, a traditional healer in a particular community. I think it's very important for you to get there and at least know how to introduce yourself and talk to this person and salute them, say hi in their own language, in the way that is most respectful for them. And this communication is something that makes me believe that these connections create sacred conversations and strengthen our memory of the past, our present. And let's remember that children are not here only to be taught, but also to teach us. And this is something that happens in these communities. And so I think that the art of rhetoric, the art of communication, is the way to fight racism, because racism stems from us not knowing each other, not living alongside each other, never having contact with each other. And that's why sometimes we see people talking about us having no idea who we really are. That's why I agree with Tusha, because it's now about time that our voices are heard when we are spoken of. So I think we have to take the role that we're entitled to, so that people can listen to our voices. Thank you.
So when I think about the future, I've always been taught that you worry about the next 7 generations, right? So my idea is everything that I do is to better the next 7 generations and put them in a better position. And I feel like some of the things that we've done to be able to do that are, lately, we started this bill in Connecticut, where as of next year, they're going to have to teach Indigenous studies in the classroom. And I feel like that's the first step, because I've always been taught that the elders tell the story and the children are the keepers of that story. So if we educate them young, then they understand the struggles, and we also prevent history repeating itself. So I think that's a big step that we've taken. Also, like with the archaeology, I mean, and that in itself, having those artifacts for those kids to kind of look at and feel and touch, and some of those artifacts that they touch are something that their ancestors held. So it kind of opens that up, as well as visibility, right? So with that Native American bill, we gain visibility, so we can't be erased again. And another thing I think of is about myself. I write poetry. So for me, I use poetry as a tool to tell our stories so that they can be passed down to the next generation. And I've inspired others in my tribe to pick up a pen and do the same thing, so that our stories are being told. And in the future, I envision a time where our people can rest. Because for so long, we've been fighting and fighting and fighting for our visibility, fighting for our identity. So my hope and my dream is that in the future, my children's children won't have to do that. My nieces and nephews won't have to do that. And that all comes from, I think, education, right? Educating the masses, letting them know that Indigenous people are here, they exist, and we remain. Through all the struggles that we've been through, we're such a proudful people, and that we're not going anywhere. That fight is inside of us. It's in our DNA. It's in our blood. It's something that we've had to do since the beginning of time. And I think about the big things were a future where we're embracing this culture, where students and kids alike are happy to say that they're Indigenous and aren't afraid to say that they're Indigenous, because for so long, a lot of us have been left voiceless. So when I think about the next 7 generations, I think about that education piece being big, and I think about regaining the culture, making sure that kids know where they come from. My mom has always told me, if you don't know your past, how can you have a future, right? So my hope for the future is that these things that we've experienced and we've had to deal with, that our children's children do not have to deal with those things as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. You've given me so much to think about. And it looks like we do have perhaps 1 or 2 questions in the chat that if one of the other co-hosts would like to read so that our panelists can respond.
Yeah, sure. I can read them aloud. But before I go to the questions, I'd like to say a few words. Well, let me just turn on my camera. I'm not sure if Luan, Yakuna, or Natasha would like to say a little more about experience that they have had, or if they have questions for each other. Yes, maybe you have questions to ask to other panelists, or would you like to open to questions from the audience? Yeah, I love what the other panelists are saying. And what I wanted to comment, I'm not sure if it's a question, but I just want to take the opportunity to say that I believe this is a historical moment. So thank you very much, Mariani, for inviting us to be here. For us, it's so important to come here and hear our relatives in the USA. And my relative also, Yakuna, from the Tusha people. I think that we really have to connect to other Indigenous peoples, and it's so important for us to listen to other perspectives, because this is a driver for our own efforts in our community. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you, because it has been very powerful coming here and listening to others so that we learn from other experiences to articulate our fight. And I love what was said. There's no future if you have no memory. So thank you so very much. Awete. Oh, I'm the one to thank you. I don't know if Yakuna or Natasha would like to say something as well before we open for questions. Yeah, I have a comment, but it's very similar to what Luan has already said. And it's something that when I go to some meetings, I see that often. Now, more and more, as I talk to Indigenous peoples from different places, I learn how diverse we are. But at the same time, there are so many things that are so similar between us. Natasha, for example, said something that I used to hear a lot from my mom, my grandma. That is the fact that we have to learn our past if we want to have a chance of a future. And this is something that really moved me. So yeah, I love the conversation.
And I agree with all the rest of the panelists as well. And I just think any opportunity where Indigenous people can come together and tell a story is a beautiful thing, because for so long, a lot of us have been left voiceless. And just it's just beautiful that we can do that. And although we are in different places, a lot of these borders are man-made. or colonialism, I would like to say. Before this time, we were close enough where we could have those conversations, where we could go to each other back in the day before these man-made constructs were here. So I'm just so grateful and thankful that I'm able to be here today.
Well, I'm the one to thank all of you. And with that, we go for the questions that come from our audience. There are so many questions here. I think I'll start with one related to archaeology. And I know that Natasha has more experience with that. But how can archaeology help to strengthen and help Indigenous communities? Do you want me to read the others, or can we answer this one first? Because we have another question about how you see different communities getting together to learn how to fight racism and to fight for land claims. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first, especially about the archaeology piece. So I know for me, I tell people a lot of times that archaeology saved my life. When I was younger and we got our federal recognition taken away, I was left so hopeless and desolate. And I felt like I didn't have an identity anymore. The government came in and said we didn't exist. And that was a hard pill for me to swallow. But then I started doing archaeology. And when I was out there, I would find artifacts that proved those people wrong. So for me, it gave me something to hold on to, and it gave me a hope, and it gave me something physical that was there that I could say, okay, like my people have been here. No matter what the government says, my people have been here and they continue to occupy this land, right? And they fought through everything that they fought through. And I'm holding some of these same artifacts that they held. So for me, archaeology was life-changing. And I'm so grateful, even to this day, for UMass Boston and Dr. Steve coming out there and helping us, and it fostered our community. Now we have people in our community that want to be archaeologists, that want to dig into the culture. So I just feel like for us, it was life-saving.
I think I can go next to then. Yeah, I love what Natasha has said. Her voice is breaking up a bit. More recently, what we have seen in our community, because we actually lived in a large patch of land here between large rivers in the northeastern Brazil. And what I did is I sat down with my brother, I talked to elders in my community, and I created a project that says the memory of our rivers. And one thing that I talked to my brother about was precisely the idea of our memory, because in our territory, it's very common for us to find artifacts that are proof that we have been there for long. And our community is now getting together to really explore that. And it's very interesting to see how we can use technology to our own benefit now. My brother and other young people, they are now mapping things using GPS technology. So when you find an artifact, you can pin it on a map. Where was it? What is it? But what I see in my people and the importance of archaeology to our history, we feel that some processes are slower than what we expected, especially these mappings and the number of archaeologists that can help us to create reports and help us document these artifacts. But I believe that archaeology is really a strong partner and a great asset for us. Okay, so yes, I can answer that question as well. archaeology, right? Well, I feel that you're asking us. No, actually, no, a bit different. For me, archaeology is not what really transforms us, but archaeologists do. So these are humans, right? These are human beings that come to talk to us in our territory. And these people can contribute by understanding our territory in a sensitive way, because again, we're talking about memory, and this memory is really important to us. But I think we have to understand how we interact with these artifacts. Why did our ancestors create it? Was there a spiritual sense to it? And I think we have to respect that. And I think archaeology should respect that as well. I think archaeology is now undergoing some sort of decolonization, but that's only now because education was created on the basis of this Western European mindset. And I think it's important for archaeologists to understand how we see our artifacts, how we see our language, what it all means for us. So I think we have to decolonize memory and archaeology, but I'm happy to see Indigenous peoples joining these courses and professions to decolonize them. But I feel that many of the friends that I have worked hard to decolonize memory so that we can recover our traditional ways and we can really promote our memory, but always respecting our territory, our memory, and also how this is going to be used in the future. Because what I want to remind you of is memory is something that also crosses our own bodies, our own languages. It's not something that is only material. We have to understand that memory is something that lives inside each and every one of us. Thank you. Thank you for these amazing contributions. There are many questions coming from the audience, so I think we can ask now Edie's questions. Actually, Edie, if you want to ask your question out loud, or otherwise I can read that out loud for you. Hey, can you hear me? Yes, we can. Okay, so good afternoon to all of you. I'm Iris Moraes. I'm currently in the Amazon region. I'm a social scientist and also a professor of archaeology. And I posted a question here because one of the panelists talked about spiritual knowledge. Yes. So I'd like to know more about how you feel the Indigenous experience in its connection with archaeology and universities, because these are spaces that usually disregard your spirituality. Yes, that's not something that is taken into consideration when producing science. In archaeology, more specifically, we see that sometimes we excavate areas, yes, sites where your ancestors have been buried, and we don't really have a decolonialized approach. And also, how can we join efforts with Indigenous communities to help you in your own fights? So I'd like to know what you think about it, because this is something that really affects me, I'd say, because I'm also a part of a traditional community of African descent, and our territory is also full of memory, and spirituality is also something that is strong for my community, but it's not strong in the archaeology diggings that I see in my territory. Thank you, Iris, for your question. Would anyone like to go first? Maybe Natasha?
It's a tough question. The one thing that stood out to me about that question, though, is that, like, what can people do to help Indigenous people? And I think one big thing is helping us provide visibility, right? Like giving us an opportunity to speak and tell our stories, because for so long, like I've mentioned, like we've been forgotten. We've been forgotten. Another thing that people can do too is reach out to the local politicians and let them know that, like, there's still Indigenous people in this fight and we're still here, we're still fighting, and we're not going anywhere. And I think it's important if people kind of join in with that as well. Thank you.
Okay, I can go next, I think. I think it is as actually hers is not only a question, but she's also contributing that archaeology needs to be decolonialized, because very often science fails to really understand traditional knowledge. And I think that we need to really create forums for dialogue so that we can understand what is the traditional knowledge of a particular territory and what you can and cannot do there. And I also think that there is a political layer all the time. So in the case of my people, for example, not only do we claim the land that was flooded by the dam, we also claim another sacred area that is an area filled with archaeological artifacts that have a spiritual component to them for us, but we need archaeologists, we need archaeology, but we need that to have a political goal so that they can help us really enjoy our land rights. The sacred territory is currently a place where non-Indigenous people visit as tourists. Yeah, there is it's on the coast, so there are beautiful beaches there. So I think it's pressing that archaeologists go there and collect our artifacts and study them, but in a way that is not detached from our own ways of living. Many of our elders, they are actually afraid of universities and academia, because from a very early age, I remember researchers from different universities going to our community to listen to our elders and to conduct their research. And then they left with rich material, but we were never told what was done with what we had shared with them. So I feel that anyone from a scientific background or from the university has to understand that we have to become partners so that science and traditional knowledge can connect. We can build bridges between the two to really help our political fights. Well, from what I understand, I also feel that we have to try and think about how a university can connect to our culture. One of the advice, well, a piece of advice that I can share with you is that, well, usually when we talk about anthropology and archaeology, we think about collecting artifacts. But in the way of life for Tupi-Guarani people, our elders said, be careful with what you remove from earth. It can be a plant, it can be a pebble, it can be the feather of a bird. Everything has energy to that. And depending on what to take home, that can make you sick, spiritually sick. So I believe that the university and other repositories, they really have to be careful about how they do that and how each community understands this, yeah, so that you don't collect artifacts the same way everywhere. So that you understand that you have to really understand the traditional knowledge of that culture, of that community before you do anything there. So I think this for me is decolonizing knowledge, is learning how to do things from those who live in the territory, because there are different ways of life in different communities, and you have to learn from them. So I think that this is one step. And also to understand the spiritual connection that people have with their artifacts, so that you don't have, let's say, pigeonholes that you have to fit information into. So how you can learn from communities when working there. So I feel that this is one thing, yes, because to me, communication is sacred. Because for many people, you're collecting just physical material, yes. But for us, for example, this that I'm holding, this is not something that, not only an object for me. I feel that it's also imbued with my spirit, with our spirit. So when craftsmen put their efforts into something, they put part of themselves there. So how can we properly handle that object? This is something that is really important. And I feel that Indigenous people working with archaeology can really contribute to that. And I think that universities should include communities in their research, because you have taken so much from our communities. What about bringing things back? Because there are so many artifacts from our community. For example, there are 7 pieces of clothing that have been taken from us, and we don't have anyone in our communities that can create this anymore, because we don't hunt the same animals to really be able to make this art anymore. So we don't have access to that, because it's actually in European museums spread in different countries. So a lot has been taken from us. And we have a spiritual connection with these objects. So maybe we can talk about that, so that you can study our objects, but we can keep them here with us. And I know that there are many archaeologists and research centers that come to our territories just to take our things. And I believe that research is welcome, but you don't have to take our things away from us. I know that my great-grandmother, she made, and she actually sued an object that is now in a museum, and I cannot enjoy, and I cannot use it anymore. That's what I had to say. Thank you. Thank you very much for your answers and comments. I'll read a few questions that are in Spanish now. I feel that the first question is something that you may have covered earlier. What are your demands for academia, for the university? And how can university help you promote initiatives that you have already been, conducting in your communities? And another question, is it important are there any processes related to ethnic education in and outside your communities, but that are really conducted and have agency from Indigenous communities and communities of African descent? So are there initiatives that connect these peoples with educational studies, history, archaeology, and also local initiatives to recover your collective memory? And any of our three speakers are welcome to answer. Oh, actually, I just want to say a few things before we continue, because Luan won't be able to stay with us till the end. So maybe we can ask a question for him before he goes. And I know that Adriana has a question for him, and then maybe we can go back to the question that was just asked. Oh, sorry, I was muted, right? Okay, so I'm Fabiana Leite. I'm currently in São Paulo. I'm a linguist. And one thing that I think a lot about is how violent it was, the erasing of indigenous languages. And my question to Luan, more specifically, is what is the role of linguistic research to really recover the Tecopora and Tupi-Guarani territories, but also if you have any initiatives to really promote your indigenous language in your territories, in your communities. And one more thing, how can universities and researchers collaborate with indigenous communities, actually, to help you promote your languages? Oh, thank you very much for your question, Professor Fabiana Leite. Well, in our territory, we have fewer and fewer people who speak our language, but we saw that we had some who were adults, but children were not learning our language any longer. That's why we decided to have meetings where we could reconnect to our spirituality, but also how we could register that in writing. Because now we have converted our oral language into written language. There are different ways to really write our language. Body markings, body painting is one of them. And I feel that sometimes writing things down is something that impacts oral language, but it is a way to perpetuate our memory. So in recent years, we realized that writing our language down would be a great way for us to spread our language and to help with decolonization efforts. So now we get together with our elders, with our children, to create material for schools. We now have indigenous school education in Brazil. So it's an educational system that we have that really tries to meet the demands of traditional communities. But even before that, we have always taught our children, as we have been doing that for centuries. And what we feel is that it's really important for us to record our memory so that the institutional education does not erase our traditional knowledge. So we write a lot of things in both our indigenous language and Portuguese. We have many initiatives with university researchers, because there are researchers that have always respected us and worked with us, respecting our approaches, and even understanding that the fact that we have an orally transmitted language is important to our culture, because oral culture is very, very important to us. It's something that we have It's how we have shared our culture for hundreds or thousands of years. So this is one way. Yes, we are recording, yes, our language, we're writing it down, but we also get together to talk, because language is not only something that comes from speaking it, but from doing what we do. For example, this basket is called ajaka in my language. If we don't get together to make these baskets, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about the verbs we use when creating it, when making it. So we have also to talk about our rituals and actually relive our rituals, our medicine, our dance, our astrology, our cuisine, our history, our memory, our science. So here, if you do all of that together, your language is also revitalized, because language is actually part of our culture. So if you want to help us, I think you have to also help us to create areas where we can talk. For example, I know that there are many linguists that used to collect a lot of data about our languages. We know that there are master's theses and doctor theses that were written about our language, but is this something that you have shared with us, or you just took it from us and it was not for our own benefit? So I think it's important for you to understand, how can your research help us? I think this is the most important thing that you can do to help us in our fight in a way that is collective and peaceful. Thank you so very much. Unfortunately, I have to go because we have an important ritual in my community right now. But thank you so very much once again for inviting me to be here. We are here actually redrawing limits, yes, because I feel that we are actually erasing the man-made limits that were put between our communities so that we can be together. And I want to say one more thing. We are not going to let anyone erase us again, and we are here to have our own voices heard. So thank you to Yakuna and Natasha and everyone who was here with us. And I hope that we can meet in person, either in the US or here in Brazil, so that we can really transform the world and heal the world. And also, I'd like to thank the organizers. Aweketa Katu, in my language, that says thank you.
I think we have just a couple more minutes if Yakuna or Natasha would also like to respond to the question about the role of university or researchers and their role with their research and connection to community and moving forward in that way. If you would like to respond, and then we can have our final comments.
Sure. Okay, so I can go next. I loved being able to hear Luan. I had never met him before, and I'm really happy to have listened to everything he had to say. I agree that we are here to redraw the limits that were imposed to us so that we can resist together. I studied Portuguese and Spanish in university, and you ask, how can researchers help us in our fights? And I think language is something very important here, right? My people speak Jubukwa. And this is not something we speak every day, and we haven't for many, many years. But our language has never been dead because it is present in our rituals. So we have now to understand how, what is our way of life and how we understand the world. And this is where sometimes we find some conflict between our knowledge and university, because there is no one who speaks our language fluently, but we still have songs and dances. And to me, it's really happy to hear my young nephew use a few words. He calls me and he tells me the words he have learned in our language. And his school is the one doing that through research. And there is a role that university plays there, connecting to our tribes. And also our rituals and spirituality is very important there. And just as an example, to talk about language research, what I see often in university are papers that say, or actually articles saying, oh, the last person who spoke that language has just died. Oh, there are just 20 people in the world that speak that other language. And what I see is that sometimes researchers, they see us as speakers of a language, as if the language was not connected to our culture, when it is. Because if our people is not here, our language is not here. So if you think about how we can get the university to help our communities, the first thing is to understand that these are people. These are people that are being abused for centuries. So when linguists talk about us as if we're only speakers of a given language, but know nothing about our struggles, help us in no way, and never address our problems, this is something that for me is also very violent. And one thing that we could do in that sense to help universities work closer to us is understand that we are not an object of your research. You shouldn't just go there, collect our knowledge, go back to university, and then become a PhD in something and have a beautiful CV and that's it. No, we're more than just the object of your research. You have to understand that we are agents of our own history.
I think that one thing that universities could do and schools can do is partner with Indigenous people and form communities, right? Like when I think about, for example, when I think about our relationship with UMass Boston, they don't come in and kind of just tell us this is what we're going to do. We're going to come to your land and we're going to dig. No, they sit and they work with us and they take what we have to say to heart and they listen to it. And I think that's the biggest thing. I even think about the way that we do archaeology on my own reservation, where whenever we remove something from the earth, we put tobacco in the ground as an offering to Mother Earth, right? And then after that, we smudge too. That's super important. When the archaeologists first come to our reservation, we smudge them. They embrace our culture. They embrace us. They look at us as more than just objects of the past, because I feel like for so long, a lot of universities look at Indigenous peoples as objects of the past and not in the present. So I honestly commend what UMass Boston does with us and what Dr. Steve does with us, because they don't treat us like these objects of the past. We're in the present. They work with us. We form partnerships. We form community. I can honestly say that I trust Dr. Steve wholeheartedly. And that's only because of that community that he's formed with us, that trust that he's built with us. So I think the first step for a lot of these universities is to build that trust so you can form that community. And in doing so, you give Indigenous people the voice they deserve. You don't speak for them, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for sharing this space today, and for the organizers for inviting me here to moderate this discussion. If I could, I would just like to amplify some of the ideas that these excellent panelists have shared with us today. The issues about recognition to states that want Indigenous peoples to be gone. And that double edge that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, and the role that archaeologists and researchers can develop with Indigenous communities and sort of partner with them in ways that allow us to begin to undo damage in some ways. and the role of art as a form of visual sovereignty for some communities, as another resistance against a state, our responsibilities, not just to our ancestors, but to future generations, what we call future ancestors, and other beings, spirit beings, and nourishing those relationships, not just with other humans, but with more than human beings. And finally, this platform here being a form of connection between Indigenous peoples across settler colonial borders. So thank you again. My language, Kichamiigwech, Ndwin Maganaduk, Bamapi, Minagwabman. Thank you so much, everyone. And I will pass it over to Dr. Stephen Silliman for final comments.
Okay, thank you, everyone. This was a truly inspirational panel, and honestly, it's a very difficult one to be the person who is supposed to bring it to a close. But I just want to say, to begin, I want to say thank you, obrigado, gracias, and kutapatush in the Pequot language of Nikki's historical community. Thanks to presenters for brilliant and inspirational comments. Thanks to Blair for excellent moderation and bringing this along nicely. And especially thanks to Mariani and Daniela for envisioning this project and doing all the logistics to bring this major event together. I think, if I'm allowed to say it, I think it was a resounding success. And it's truly an honor to be asked to bring this event to a close. I'm humbled to be asked to do so, and in many ways, I don't want to be the final word as the non-Indigenous academic on the panel. In many ways, I want to just defer to all that has been said already and sort of bring it to a close. But maybe, since they've asked me to do so, I'll add just a few comments that hopefully are acceptable and address some of the issues that were talked about today. And I think what's really amazing about this panel, as they've acknowledged, and as we all should acknowledge, they are the voices of the past, they're voices of the present, and most importantly, they're voices of the future. The seminar today, I think, represents a next wave of what this kind of work can look like, and I'm excited to see the leadership coming from Indigenous people, and especially Indigenous women and Indigenous artists, as everyone as a lot was being emphasized about that today, and to see all the ways that cooperation and collaboration between Indigenous communities and those between communities and the academy can work, how those might work. As was noted by several people, real change will only come with collective action. Colonialism itself created its damage through lots of collective action, genocide, displacement, racism, ranging from the daily practices of common people all the way up through governmental action. So it must be fought and unraveled with Indigenous collective action. And in fact, many changes in, let's say, archaeology as a discipline and government policies in Brazil and the United States have changed thanks to just that kind of Indigenous activism. And also this kind of international Indigenous conversation, especially with the inclusion of African diasporic people in the long arc of this seminar series, is really paving the way for what these future dialogues and future change might look like. So there were multiple themes that came out in the panel today: racism, education, language, land, art, history, spirituality, just to name some of the high points. The three speakers show that the way forward, as it has been in the past, is through both struggle and fight and a lifting up of Indigenous voices and cultures. Now, part of that lifting up is amplifying voices, protecting bodies, valuing and encouraging artistic expression, and acknowledging history. On the other hand, the fight part is hard and tiring. As Natasha mentioned, the goal is to build time for future generations to perhaps rest a bit more as these struggles can hopefully subside as more wins are made. And language is a good example, as several people talked about. It's something that must be kept up and restored in the wake of colonialism, and that isn't easy. We've also heard about the role of artists and art, especially from Yakuna. And as many people talked about, education is vital. And as Luan noted, education is also a tool of oppression, and it needs more decolonization for it to be able to do some of the work that we all hope that it can. And I think there were lots of great comments here today on how this might work and how education can be centered in indigenous perspectives rather than just overriding or trying superficially to bring them in. Now, one of my favorite moments in the panel was when Luan talked about memory. Luan noted that memory is the future and it helps to build the future, and also that the future is yesterday and it is embodied. And I like the way this brought all of these multiple temporalities and experiences and embodiments kind of all together in a particularly indigenous way. And Luan also noted some important things and powerful things about territory, that means land, it means body, and it means language. And to me, this expanded thinking addresses the fundamental questions of sovereignty. And on the topic of memory, I just want to briefly mention archaeology as it surfaced as a theme in the panel and in the questions. And as noted in the beginning, I am an archaeologist, and I've had the honor of working with the Eastern Pequot Tribal Nation for the last 20 years on an archaeology and heritage project. Natasha or Nikki referred to that several times during some of her comments. And this project has taught me so much about indigenous rights, land, history, community, identity, and knowledge. And it's also been a space for us to develop a deep collaboration between Native Nation and university, and between archaeologists and a lived community. And it has shown me that even when I had doubts about my own discipline, one that it has terrible colonial roots and practices, as we all know about archaeology, that it can actually do some good. And to do that good, it has to be aligned with indigenous community needs. And Natasha today called it life-saving. And honestly, I can think of nothing more profound and humbling than hearing that about archaeology, because that doesn't happen very often. Archaeology can do this, and this is acknowledging the question that Iris raised, by not just doing science, but by making archaeology about telling stories of persistence, and as some indigenous people in North America say, stories of survivance. Focusing on storytelling aligns the archaeology project with some of the fundamental ways of indigenous sharing and education, that is, through stories. And as Yakuna and Luan both noted in different ways, archaeology and education and other parts of the academy must be political, it must be decolonized, it must give rather than take, and it must acknowledge the well-founded fears and suspicions of academia that some indigenous communities have. And responding to Luan's comment about the university as a repository, I think that universities should definitely be moving away from that role and instead focus on uplifting, caretaking, allegiance, and respect. This is what I want to keep encouraging at my own home institution here in Boston in the United States. And as Natasha noted on the panel, it takes trust, it takes time, and it takes willingness to do so. So on that note, again, all of you have my utmost gratitude, and I hope that I've done some justice in these closing comments to the richness that you are and that you shared. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Steve and Blair. Indeed, this was an incredible panel We still have many unanswered questions on the chat, but we are short on time. So I just want to thank everyone who has joined. If all our panelists and moderators would like to turn on their cameras, that would be okay. But again, I want to thank Yakuna, Natasha, Luan, Blair, and Steve for your amazing contributions, for the incredible debate. I also want to thank the Interdisciplinary Lab of Evolution, Culture, and the Environment from the Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology at the University of São Paulo, and the Latin American Historical Archaeology Lab and the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and everyone who helped us to put this thing together. Simone Lemos, Tânia Casimiro, Francisco Noelle, Genesis Delgado, Cleberson Moura, Michele, Carlos, and everyone representing Conamud who are with us on YouTube, representatives of the African and African American Studies, Marina, who represents traditional communities in São Paulo, and of course, everyone who joined us for this panel, who are either here on Zoom or on YouTube. Thank you so very much for all of you who has joined. This was an amazing conversation. We are going to have another session in June, and we will be sending more information to all of you soon. I don't know if Daniela would like to say a few words before we go. I just want to thank everyone and actually second all the gratitude that Marianne has shown. This is the first of many meetings that we hope to host, and we hope that you can all join us for the other meetings. I also want to circle back to what Luan mentioned about the territory being more than the land and being also our bodies and memories. And I think that this is something that is really important for archaeologists and universities to understand. So with that, I thank you all for having joined us. Yakuna or Natasha, would you like to say a few things before we go? Maybe Steve and Blair? Yes. So I just want to thank you for inviting me to be here and to talk to you. I hope that I was able to say things that were relevant to my relatives. And I also want to celebrate everyone who helped make this possible today. And I loved meeting Luan and Natasha and to listen to Stephen and learn more about your research. I want to learn more now about UMass Boston and everything you have done in terms of Indigenous archaeology, because I see that you really work with communities. And so with that, thank you so very much for inviting me to be here. I'm really thankful.
And I just want to echo that and say Katapatash Tabatne. Thank you for having me, and thank you for letting me tell our story. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, we end this panel. Thank you so very much.